As I already said, today we celebrate our Blessed Mother. We celebrate the dedication of our country to her. But I'd like to read out to you a message to Nigeria and to Nigerians. So you will find that it is not a sermon as such, but it is a sermon about where we are. I want to first thank God Almighty, the Father of all creation and the Maker of heaven and earth. Strange as it may sound, I'd like to thank the colonial masters who wove our diverse peoples together, and for all the efforts that they put into ensuring that our country had everything a people had to launch itself into a modern state. It is also time to thank those brave and selfless missionaries who laid the foundation of our modern civilization by providing us with high-quality education even before the colonial masters arrived at our country. We must appreciate the context of colonialism and the fact that its driving philosophy was the exploitation of our resources, and we must concede that they laid the foundation for extracting our resources for the development of their own country. Their interests were buried in the womb of the country that they created. However, today, we have destroyed the institutions that the colonial administration created, and we have distorted the image of our own development. On October 1st, 1960, when we became independent, our joy clearly knew no end. It was my first year in primary school. We all turned out as neat as we could afford to hear our headmaster talk to us about the terrible white men who had come and stolen our land. I didn't understand this because I never saw anyone stop my father and other members of my community from going to their farms. I didn't understand this because we were playing around freely with no let or hindrance. I saw no policemen around, and we played freely in our village. So I thought to myself, which land did these white people come to steal? I had seen only 2 white men in my entire life. Both of them were priests, even though I did not know fully what a Catholic priest was. But they were good men. And we were told they came from a very far country. And we knew from their skin that they didn't look like us. In fact, it is said that when one thief man saw the first white man, he ran to his house, fetched water, started pouring on the white man because he thought the poor man had fallen inside fire. The white men or the priests I saw had built a church and a school in our village. And that was the first building that I saw that was not touched with grass. It was impossible for me to understand how any white man could be so wicked to steal our land. The teacher talked about a new song. We will later realize it's called an anthem, which we were supposed to sing in praise of our dear country and our freedom, even though I did not see anything that was new. I had no idea that what was being said in the song. I had no idea about what was being said in the song. And all we did as children was to try and murmur something in excitement. The greatest treasure was the little flags and cups that were distributed to all of us. Holding the first cup in my life and waving a little flag seemed like a great contradiction to the headmaster's portrayal of the white man as a thief. We soon learned the name of our new Prime Minister, Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, the man who came to be known as the Golden Voice of Africa. In his speech on October 1st, and I encourage you to read it, the Prime Minister announced that, quote, "Our new day had arrived," and he promised to dedicate his life to the service of his country. The Prime Minister also noted that our country had emerged without bitterness and bloodshed. Those are his words. And he also stated, and I quote, that building our nation proceeded in the wisest pace and that it has been thorough, and Nigeria now stands on what he called well-built foundations. Barely 6 years later, we murdered him. He became a symbol of the blood sacrifice that has now drenched our country and turned it into a sea of blood arising from the Civil War, the endless cycles of communal bloodletting, which have now become part and parcel of our governance structure. Successive leaders have not come to terms with how to end the culture of death. Today, our country is littered with the very sharp pieces of broken promises. Yesterday's dreams have become our worst nightmares. As we look back today, watching our country drift in a wide sea of uncertainty, we are compelled to ask with the psalmist, "From where shall come our help?" But the same psalmist tells us, "Our help shall come from the name of the Lord." After 60 years of bloodletting, blood has become embedded in our culture of existence. So where do we find the inspiration to celebrate 60 years of independence? Of course, there is enough blame to go around. We can blame the British, we can blame our politicians, we can blame the military, but none of these changes anything. It is the fate of nations to go through the furnace and crucible of suffering. No nation dropped from heaven. Under the banner of religion, Europe forward what has come to be known as the 30-year war, beginning with a fight between Catholics and Protestants, later stretched on for 30 years, between 1618 and 1648. The world lost millions of men and women in two wars propelled by human greed. The First World War, 1914 to 1918. The Second World War, 1939 to 1945. Fleeing from the Kuomintang army in 1934, Mao Zedong led his people on the famous Long March, stretching what many have said in history between 4,000 and 5,000 miles, between 1934 and 1935. It's almost like trekking from here to London. And we remember Mandela's biography titled Long Walk to Freedom is a metaphor for the struggles against white domination. My dear brothers and sisters, journeys to greatness require more than just good people. It requires more than just goodwill. It requires more than just hope. The journeys have to be led by men and women with vision, men and women of tested character, prepared to mobilize their people to a vision and a goal that may not be necessarily available or attainable, but encourage them to march towards the attainment of that goal. It is against this backdrop that every year a nation celebrates its independence, just like a man celebrating his birthday, a woman celebrating her birthday, a man celebrating his wedding anniversary, a woman celebrating the wedding anniversary. Each anniversary calls on us to do introspection. How far have we traveled on the road we set for ourselves? It is easy to say that we have been an unlucky country because the evidence is glaring. Indeed, one of our presidents marveled at how Nigeria, that had taken so much beating, was still standing, unable to collapse. In spite of the huge resources after 60 years, today, as citizens, we cannot feed ourselves. Excuse me. Today, after 60 years, our people are not safe. Today, after 60 years, our nation is still in darkness. Today, after 60 years, we cannot communicate with one another by means of roads and railways. Today, after 60 years, our nation has become at best a death trap. We are ordinary citizens, are haunted by marauders and murderers. What we inherited even from the British, we have either stolen, broken, or thrown away. The nation is now a wasteland littered with white elephant projects, conceived and abandoned, but all paid for. Governance, at best, in Nigeria has become not a call to service, but a criminal enterprise for self-appropriation and self-improvement. No nation has ever taken a shortcut to success, not because nations have not tried, but simply because there are no shortcuts that are available. The military, perhaps even worse than the colonial administration, destroyed the very foundations of our democracy, the foundations of our bureaucracy, the foundations of public service, by introducing a culture of arbitrariness and lawlessness, in which violence was the only means to power. A combination of these laid the foundation for corruption as the worst manifestation of the total lack of accountability. To be sure, when General Abdul Salam broke with the military tradition of clutching to power in 1999, he did lay a foundation for the return of the country to democracy and hopefully an end to military rule. We thank God, looking back, that after 20 years, we have conducted 5 back-to-back elections, even within the most controversial circumstances and despite the violence. After 16 years of being ruled by one political party, the nation decided it was fed up with the arrogance and blatant thieving and looting mentality that had become the political culture of the time. The citizens of Nigeria made a radical and unprecedented turn. And thus, in 2014, the unexpected happened. Namely, a sitting president in Africa would concede defeat against the run of play, and even well before the tally of votes had come in. The nation, well across ethnic, religious, regional, and class lines, believed our worst nightmare was over. The incoming president had campaigned on a rich menu of promises, promising to bring back the Chibok girls, promises to end corruption, promising to end Boko Haram, promising to end poverty, promising to unite our country. Indeed, he had ushered in so much lofty hope to uphold the Constitution when he said in his inaugural speech on May 29, 2015, "I will belong to everyone and to no one." We all took these promises and we looked up in hope to a man who had campaigned on the key philosophy of integrity and character. Today, the tide has woefully turned. The president has turned his back on almost all the key promises he made to the people of Nigeria during the campaign. Today, our country now looks like a boiling pot in which everyone is struggling to escape. Nepotism has become the new ideology of this government. In following this ideology, it is estimated, and it's very interesting, this statement was made by a northern Muslim journalist, that the president has handed over 85% of key appointments to northern Muslims and has ensured that men of his faith hold tight to the reins of power in the most critical areas of our national life, such as the National Assembly and the security agencies. In Chapter 2 of our Constitution, under faith fundamental objectives and directive principles of state policy, the Constitution states very clearly and unambiguously in Section 13, and I quote, "It shall be the duty and the responsibility of all organs of government and of all authorities and persons exercising legislative, executive, judicial powers to conform to, observe, and apply the provisions of this chapter of the Constitution." From the President to the least public office holder, the Constitution, which is the Bible, political Bible, or the secular Bible that holds any country together, the Constitution on which the President, the governors, and public officers swear by, and they swear to uphold the principles. Section 14, subsection 1 says, and I quote, "The Federal Republic of Nigeria shall be a state based on the principles of democracy and social justice." Those are the two critical pillars on which the Federal Republic of Nigeria hangs. So you measure the success of Nigeria by the quality of democracy and social justice. That is what the Constitution says. Article B follows by stating, and I quote, "The security and welfare of the people shall be the primary purpose of government." That means that the President of Nigeria, the governor of every state, the chairman of every local government in this country has their primary responsibility, the obligation to ensure that their people are safe, and that, like a mother and her child, their people don't go to bed hungry. These are the tests by which we can measure the faithfulness, the commitment of the President, the governor, the local government chairman, and all public office holders in Nigeria. Subsection 3 of the Constitution says, and I quote, please listen carefully, "The composition of the government of the Federation or any of its agencies, the composition of the government of the Federation or any of its agencies and the conduct of its affairs shall be carried out in such a manner as to reflect the federal character of Nigeria and the need to promote national unity and also to command loyalty, national loyalty, that is, loyalty to our nation, thereby ensuring that there is no, please listen, there is no predominance of persons from a few states or from a few ethnic or other sectional groups in that government or any of its agencies." This is a constitution the President and everybody holding office swore by. That the composition of government, whether ministers, heads of parastatals, the bureaucracy, every effort must be made to ensure that people from a particular religion, people from a particular ethnic group, people from a particular region, indeed even people of a particular gender, particular complexion, particular height, do not monopolize power. However, by adopting nepotism as a primary ideology, clearly unable to secure our country and people. President Muhammadu Buhari is in flagrant violation of the constitution that he swore to uphold. And the evidence that I have adduced suggests that this is not my thinking. It is what the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria states. Today, our sense of national unity is severely under threat and test. Our common citizenship has been fractured and diminished. The principles of equity, social justice, democracy, fairness, egalitarianism, on which our Constitution hangs, have been assaulted, violated, and diminished. Nigerian citizens feel collectively violated. There is clearly a conflict in narratives and understanding between the principles and ideologies contained in the Constitution, the manifesto of the APC as a party on which the president campaigned, and the brutal realities in Nigeria today. It would seem that it was in anticipation of this dissonance that the president built such a firewall of protection around himself by partisan selection of security chiefs based on religion, region, or ethnic affiliation. It could be the reason for the adoption of the same principles in the National Assembly as we have it today, where for the first time in the history of our nation, Senate President, the Speaker of the House, and their deputies and majority leaders are all of the same region and the same faith. Perhaps this consciousness would never have arisen. And I'm making the point, therefore, that this is a clear violation of the Constitution, and in other countries, in other climes, these are clear grounds of impeachment, because a president swears to uphold, live by the principles of the Constitution. It remains for the National Assembly to test the limits of that claim against the brutal realities that Nigerians face today. The president has been quite diligent and focused in the pursuit of an agenda that is clearly alien to the aspirations, the hopes, the dreams of our people across religious lines. We have nothing here to talk about Islam as a religion, Christianity as a religion, Nigeria as northerners, southerners, easterners. Right across this country, the length and breadth of this country, every group of people is hot. It's not about religion. It is about the choice made by an individual. The vision that we see does not conform with the aspiration, the founding fathers of our country, the letter and the spirit of our Constitution. Nigeria was nothing like this before now. How long will this lie last before it melts in our faces? We are living a lie, and we all know it. The motto of our dear country is unity and faith, peace and progress. Today, my dear brothers and sisters, where is Nigerian unity? Today, where is Nigeria? Where is our faith in Nigeria? Today, where is the peace in Nigeria? Today, where is the progress in Nigeria? Let us remember, the world stood still and stood shoulder to shoulder with Nigeria, and it expected great things from Nigeria. And if you read the speech of our Prime Minister, both the speech on October 1st and the speech that he delivered when he traveled to the United States, you can see very clearly evidence that Europe and America were determined to accompany Nigeria to greatness. Indeed, on the 5th of December, 1960, Time magazine did what it had never done, namely, it placed our Prime Minister as Man of the Year. No black person had ever been conferred with that honor before. Today, where are we? Finally, at the end of his speech in 60 years ago, our beloved Prime Minister thanked the missionaries and mentioned them specifically for the great work that they had done in Nigeria. We in the Catholic Church, in keeping with that tradition, have remained relentless. And we are still on our duty post, following the legacy of those who have gone before us. We still stand shoulder to shoulder, committed, dedicated to providing education, health services across the board, with no consideration of ethnicity or religion. That is a legacy the Catholic Church is proud to uphold. And that is a legacy and a faithfulness that was manifested when, at the setting up of the committee on COVID-19, the entire Bishops' Conference decided to present to the federal government of Nigeria all our 465 health centers and hospitals spread across this country. That spirit of the common pursuit of the common good has been our principle as Catholics. We remain firmly committed to it. And this is why our president appealed to the entire Catholic community around the world, but particularly in Nigeria. And we devoted the last 39 days, ending today, 40 days of committed prayer for the greatness of our country. We know that the God we worship will not abandon us. We as a church remain committed to the greatness of our country. But we must have the courage to point out when collectively it is clear to us this country is not benefiting the majority of its citizens. And today, after 60 years, it is a period to renew our vows. But it is doubtful that majority of Nigerians will respond to the summons of being called upon to renew their commitment to Nigeria. They will ask, which Nigeria? Because this Nigeria has not been fair to its citizens. And this lack of fairness has become more manifest in the last few years. We all face a dilemma. Is our national day just a day for celebration? Or is it a day that we can be called upon to sing God's song in Babylon? How can we sing a song of joy when our daughters, the Chibok girls, are still in captivity? How can we sing a song of joy or a national anthem when our daughter, Leah Sharibu, is still not accounted for? How can we sing a song of joy when the sponsored murderers are still running across our land? How can we sing a song of joy when it is almost evident that this year, majority of ordinary farmers will not be able to harvest their crops because they were not able to sow? How can we sing a song of joy amidst this gloom and uncertainty? Mr. President, I want to appeal to you. Our country is now literally a pool of blood. Please reset the clock before it is too late. I pray for you, and Nigerians continue to pray for you, that you turn your attention from those hypocrites who see the failure of the Nigerian state as politics. We see it as a matter of life and death. This is not the Nigeria we dreamt of. This is not the Nigeria, Mr. President, that you fought in a war and gave your life and tried to give your life. With hope in God, but with sorrow in my heart as a Nigerian, I say to Nigerians, let us stand together in hope, in love, and in confidence. Let us renew our faith, because our salvation, as St. Paul says in Romans chapter 13, verse 11, our salvation is nearer now than when we believe. God bless you, and God bless our country.